Art is something that makes you breathe with a different kind of happiness. Annie Albers. This is Deep Dive Creatives, a podcast all about creativity. If you're all about creativity also, consider supporting this podcast by hitting that subscribe or follow button and leave an encouraging word or two in the comment section. Meet Reuben Gershin.
I want to be the best. I want to do more than I did last year, different than I did last year. I want to come up with a way that I'm doing it that is so weird and unusual.
Reuben began his career as a high school science and math teacher and was on his way to your traditional American dream.
I absolutely loved what I did, got married, had a house.
Of course, being a homeowner can often come with homeowner building projects.
We started like, oh, I want this, I want that, I want this other thing. And then we started like, well, I can build that. And so I started picking up tools, and I had never done more than very minor handy style things. And I started woodworking, and I really loved the first project I did where I actually measured out something and made a jig to make two pieces that were not just like close to each other, that were like actually the same size. And then I was like, oh, this is really cool.
Reuben soon found he had an affinity towards woodworking and began working towards building up his woodworking arsenal.
So we didn't have a lot of money, and so it was like, okay, I save up this year. I bought a table saw on Facebook for like $70, and then I fixed it up. And I mean, I was a high school science teacher, so I used it in one of my classes. We did electrolysis, so we de-rusted it and put it in there and did all that stuff. And I brought it in. It was a blast, and and then fixed that up, and then got some lumber from somewhere that was really free or cheap, and then I built a bench around it, and it was awful, but it worked, like one of those. And each time I learned a little bit and I got better. And then at some point I started doing things where I wanted real wood, not like the wood that someone gave away that was on the side of the road kind of stuff. And it started getting kind of pricey. It's really expensive to get good wood. And so my wife kind of sat me down and she said, you want wood? You better start selling. That's how it has to be.
That was a pivotal point in Reuben's creative journey. Soon, his sights began to focus in on becoming a full-time woodworker.
And so I was like, okay, I could do this. And I was like, well, what have I made? And I looked around and I was like, well, I've made us cutting boards. And in the process, I started making everyone else I knew cutting boards. I was like, well, I'll start selling those. I already made a bunch of them, and I started selling them. And then I just slowly over time leveraged that. So, each year I do maybe one holiday thing. And each holiday I do, make $1,000, buy a new tool, buy wood for the year, buy whatever. And I slowly leveraged over the years. And now we are talking 18 years later, something like that. And this will be my third year full time. I got to about 2021 and I just was super burnt out in teaching. And I was having a lot of medical issues, all of which can be derived back to stress. But it was time for a major life change. And so I quit and we started our own business. Well, I quit and I started trying to look for other jobs. And when that didn't work out very well, I said, well, let's just do it ourselves. And so this is the beginning of our fourth year of doing this full time.
Reuben specializes in incredibly intricate and creative cutting boards. But that wasn't the plan he started out with.
I like cutting boards, they're cute, they're fun, but who can make cutting boards the rest of your life? You're gonna have to do something better. There's gotta be furniture, something better. So, I'll do that, and maybe, we'll start getting clients, and once I get clients, then maybe we'll do more furniture and less cutting boards. And we had a conversation the other night, my wife and I, that I think it's time to just take other crafts off the work, because I really just love the cutting boards.
Specializing in cutting boards affords Reuben the opportunity to go down a lot of creative paths.
I can play a lot of what-if games, more so than I would for furnitures that are all one-off pieces. And so you really want to do it right the first time if you've only got one. But if I'm making a ton of them, I can keep saying, well, what if I do this? And that's really fun to me. So I really love it. I haven't found an upper limit yet. I find the crazier I get in my patterning, the crazier the price is, and people still buy it. And so I just keep going. At first I was like, there's no way someone would buy a $700 cutting board, but they do all the time. So okay, let's go more, let's go crazy. And when I mean more, not like more price, that happens, but I want to see how far I can push it before it just becomes unreasonable. There's no limit right now.
Well, as Reuben unpacks his thoughts about creativity, I hope his enthusiasm and love of the creative process will inspire you to continue your own adventurous journey down the wild path of creativity. Let's dive in.
For me, creative is doing something different. As I said, I play the what if game. I love the what if game. So for my pieces, it's not just, here's how I do this. It's, well, what if I do this? What if I do that? And my wife laughs at me. So we do a lot of cooking. I cook a lot. We make everything ourselves from scratch. And so like we have a recipe, like I have my own bread recipe. I have my own croissant recipe. And I have those recipes that I wrote, that I developed. And if I were to make that recipe, I still can't follow that recipe because I'm like, well, what if I add more sugar? What if I do this? And so it's not just the recipe concept, it's me. I can't follow a recipe because I want to see, and sometimes, you add too much baking soda and you can tell. Add too much baking powder, and you're like, well, that's what the baking powder did. And there is an upper limit there. But for me, that's what I love. So creativity is just playing with the what if game and like, what's different? How does this change that? And playing with that. With my creative process, I'm always asking like, what if? Like, if I change this, then how does, and sometimes it's awful. And that is the beautiful thing about what I do now. I have a background in math and science. And so I do everything, with that in mind. So like this is what I take to markets. I'll take this is my, how do I make things? But basically I find something and I just spend a lot of time on Google images and random images and geometric images. And what I'm looking for are certain things. Like I can't do everything in wood. I have to have certain criteria be met. So the way I measure things and the way I do things, I really only operate at either 90 degrees, 45 degrees, or 30, because any weird angles just become, you get a compounding error that you really just cannot account for. You just can't do it. It just is there and it becomes progressively worse over the time. So I look for certain things. I look for like lines have to stay parallel. I can't have like vanishing points because then every angle is unique and it's just really hard to deal with because I don't do anything computer generated. So I don't do computer CNC stuff. It's all me in my shop. So I have to do it. So I find an image. Okay, this is an image. Now what was this? So I take it in and I bring it into the program and I kind of draw into like kind of like try to get a sense for how to make this image. And I say, okay, I kind of got it, but it's really hard to get it perfectly straight on and like all the lines and what if there was a distortion. So like I understand this drawing. Okay, if I understand it, then I say, okay, looking at this, I make my pieces. And these pieces come from a different kind of drawing space and there's a whole history here. But basically this style of drawing was developed back in the old days before computers. You had to draw a blueprint for something. And so you needed a way to draw accurate dimensions, but also to do it on a piece of paper that had parallel lines, because if you have a vanishing point, the back of the building is non-existent and you can't tell what's going on. So you need to have lines that stay parallel. So you're drawing up blueprints, but you also want to show like, oh, this is on top of that. And so how do you show dimension? And so this is the way you do it. And I say, okay, these are the pieces and I have a way to I know how to make these pieces. And I say, okay, so if these are the pieces, now I take them and I put them together properly. And now now I can do this. And then I say, okay, so if these are the pieces, okay, so now I'm looking at it and it's like, well, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, so it repeats every fourth. Oh, okay. So then I take it and I break it apart and say like, okay, well, if that's the board, then these are the 4 panels made up of these pieces. And then I go through and I count and I do all the math and I say, okay, so I'll need, this much of this and da 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 da. And then, so that's the process. And then at some point I have it here. And then this is the final result, if that makes sense. And even more fun here is focus on one of these single blocks. So this is playing a trick on your mind because it actually is flat and it looks, so the reason it looks that way, the question is it an innie or an outie? And as I go around, sometimes it'll pop out, And sometimes it'll come in. And so depending on which side of the drawing you're on, it'll either go in or out. And so that's kind of fun. We talked earlier about wood being so expensive. It is so expensive. And so when you're doing this on the side hobby and you're making 3 cutting boards and you try something, you better be good, because if you don't, like, you've only got 3 cutting boards and like the wood is, you know, $45, $50 for one of them, and you can sell the board for 100. Great. You put in 10 hours, you got $4 an hour, and minus your sandpaper, right? So like you have no margin, and then you screw it up, and now instead of being this really cool 3D pattern, it's just kind of this geometric thing. And it's like, it'll still sell, but you're not going to make any money, and then you just blew your whole wood budget. And so like, how do you deal with that, right? And so for me, the process was a lot smoother once I went full-time. Now, I don't like the pattern. I just mark it 20% off, red pen, call it a day, put it on the side of the booth, and just big sign that says sale, and I don't care. And I still learned and I can move on. But when I was doing it on the side, that was an almost insurmountable obstacle, because that might have been half of my wood budget for the year. And I was assuming that I would leverage it up to more money for more wood after, but if I don't, then I'm basically at a dead end. And that was a really big problem for me. So my process required me to have enough leeway to make those mistakes and not become a game, you know, ender kind of a thing. What inspired me was I got a house, I got married, and I wanted to do wood projects, so I built some like outdoor planter thing, and then I built like a planting bench to be able to pot up things, and then we built like an indoor table thing, and then it just kept going from there. And when I was looking around, there's a YouTuber, MTM Wood. He's been on there since forever. I mean, some of his videos are 15, 20 years old. And he was on there before it was cool, you know, and his concept, the way he does his 3D patterns is really amazing compared to most of the others. And there's a lot of others that are copying him now. But when you're watching something on YouTube, very often you have to remind yourself that the person you're seeing is not specifically a woodworker, not to complain that their woodwork isn't good. It's that they're a content creator, they're not a woodworker. And so they might spend 50 hours and they might make that piece, and it is stunning. But if I spend 50 hours making that cutting board, it's going to be $4,000 cutting board, and I just don't think that's reasonable. So there's got to be a way to improve that production process, and that's the difference between someone who does it part-time and someone who does it full-time, is I can keep that level of quality and do it at a very high scale and make it actually profitable. I can actually make reasonable living wage. And so that's where MTM, he has a process that is scalable, but also accurate, because a lot of times when you're scaling, you can't be accurate. And so his process was really, really inspirational for me. I remember watching his videos hundreds of times, and you just pause with I mean, we're talking old, okay? Like before, so like I pause it and I had a ruler up to the screen, and I was like, okay, so these are about same distance. This is about twice as much as that. That makes sense. Okay, so this is about 2 to 1, that's about 1 to 1. Okay, you know, and working out his process. And I use all my own patterns. I use everything myself, but none of this is new. Like the patterns, like some of these tiling patterns have been done in, you know, the mosques from the 10th century. I mean, you know, we're talking like nothing is new here, but the process that I follow is what I developed. And I base a lot of my process off of him. And that's where I actually am really proud of this board here, because this one is 100% my creation, like process. No one else shows how to make this online. I made it myself. And a process that is different. Others have made it, but I don't like their way of doing it. And he is one of those. MTM is one of those. So he actually made this board on his channel at one point. And I made mine myself. And I was really proud. I told my wife that, like, I'm really proud because I made a board and I really feel like the quality is good, but also the process is more efficient than what he did. And he was the one that inspired me to that style. So I felt really good about that. I taught myself woodworking. I am 100% self-taught from YouTube. I taught myself, I would practice, I practiced, I kept practicing until I got here. John Hardin, he is a local artist in the Pacific Northwest area, and he basically does what I do, but he turns it into bowls. So he'll do this really cool 3D, whatever, cool geometric, and then he'll cut it and put it together as a bowl. So as you're going around the curve, you get stretching and distortion, right? So it'll be what you see on mine on the two ends, but then as it goes around the curve, it like stretches it and distorts it, and it's super cool. And so I saw his video kind of in the same timeline as the others, where I was kind of getting into it and playing around. And I remember watching his video, and he's got this interview with like Wagner moisture meters back in like 2011 or something way back. And he's got this interview that he did. And I remember the interview, and I met him in 2025 at an art show. We were at an art show, we were talking because, you know, fellow wood vendors, we collaborate, commiserate, whatever, you know, and we were chatting, and I was like, wait a minute, are you, and you know, I was like, so he was one of the ones that inspired me, and I always said to myself, oh, I'm going to do that, like cutting, no one does cutting boards forever, I'm going to do the cutting boards, and then I'm going to make them into that, and I just never got past the doing the cutting boards part so far. I do a lot of brainstorming. I would say my problem is not dry spells. My problem is figuring out how to make something. So I have lots of ideas, but as I said, I'm trying really hard to make a living. I am not just making a piece. And so I have to be able to make a living on anything I create. And so the first time I make something, I will just make it, and I don't track materials. I use whatever I need to use. I use as much time as I need to do it. And then the second time around, I say, okay, now I'm going to use X materials. I'm going to get, okay, you only get 4 hours, you know, and do this now that I kind of know what to do. And sometimes I get to that second step and I say, okay, I love this idea, but this is just going to have to I'm going to have to charge twice as much, which I don't know if it'll sell, or I'm going to have to find a different way. So often at that second step, I'll pause and I'll just like let it sit for a long time in the back somewhere in my mind. And at some point, sometimes I come up with a better way. And sometimes the honest answer is, well, maybe I get to a point where I'm willing to charge $1,500 for a cutting board. I just feel like that would be absurd. I don't know. Maybe it's not absurd. Maybe I shouldn't judge that. Maybe I should just try it and see. But it just feels out of scope for everything else that I've done so far. I have a client who I do a lot of really custom work, and he will make, and he will pay what it's worth. You know, we're talking like his house is just whole. I mean, all I do is the wood, and I deliver it to the painter who then stains it, and then he delivers it to the handy guy who actually installs it. You know, like all I do is make custom trim, and it is incredible. But I can't pre-make that, right? He's a one-off. He tells me what he wants. You know, like I can't imagine selling it at that price. Just here's this thing that I made 6 of. Would you, you know, like that seems crazy, right? I don't know, maybe. I have a project that doesn't work out. This was the project that doesn't work out. So when I do these pieces, I am making them with these blocks. And so I make this multi-block and then I glue these together. So this is a square, and it's that same square turned and that same square. So it's just that one piece in 2 orientations. When I glue it together, I have to have them in the correct orientation for the intended pattern. These got glued together in the wrong orientation for the expected pattern. So I could not so I get through that whole process, I get to the second to last step, and I can't do what I said I was going to do. And so I kind of had to sit down and play with the pieces and figure out what's wrong. And this one actually took me quite a long time to actually commit to because I was worried about it looking like a swastika. So I was like I had to send the picture to 17 different people. Like, what do you see here? Do you see it's inappropriate? Does this seem reasonable? Okay, it seems reasonable. Like it's not, and it is, everyone consensus is it's definitely a pinwheel. But so like that's what it came to. So I had these pieces and I'm like, okay, so I can only put them together. So this is the prettiest. And so that was what I did with that, if that makes sense. And it is still with me. So I will say that the board that it was supposed to be has gone through 3 batches since then. This one is the last of its batch, so it is definitely not as popular. What motivates me? I want to see what's possible. That's my thing. I am constantly asking what if. And when I first started out, I would have said a geometric cutting board, that, you know, end grain that most people make, a geometric cutting board has 2 steps into the creation process. And that is usually the most intricate. People will say a cutting board. Oh, that's about it. You know, an end grain, okay, that's great, 2 steps. I'll make 27-step end grain cutting boards now. So that means 27 gluing steps in that process. So like, I first thought, no one's gonna buy a 4-step cutting board. How much, you know, think about the labor you put in there. What about 10 steps? Are you kidding me? Like, that's crazy. And it just keeps, and what I found was, actually, I do better the crazier I get, because I overwhelm them, as opposed to when I had a few, like 1 or 2 fancies, and then most of the ones, the smaller ones, whatever, that sell, I didn't get as much attention. But now people walk up and they're just like, wow, that's so cool. And that's what inspires me, is like, is this possible? And specifically, my wood is medium. Medium is wood, so can I do this in wood? Can I make that design using only wood textures? You know, that's the, and of course money's great, but for me it's trying to see what's possible. My philosophy in the creative process, I try really hard. It has to be accurate and it has to be repeatable, and that's really important. And it has to be something interesting and fun, and that is the key. Is I try really hard to make it accurate and repeatable, and a lot of times you come up with a process that can make what you want, but it's not repeatable. It's all a bunch of one-off steps. And so I'm doing something for one. And if I'm doing something for one, then that one better be really, really expensive. I will make my wife a custom, you know, like jewelry box, right? That's a one, but I can't make that for a living unless I can make 5 or 10, you know. I want to be the best. And what I mean by be the best is, it's not, to me, it's not a competition. It's, I want to be the best. I want to do more than I did last year, different than I did last year. I want to come up with a way that I'm doing it that is so weird and unusual that someone says, wow, how did you do that? And I want it to be better. That's, you know, and that is my goal, is just to be the best at what I do. For me, the threats to my creativity, I've worked a lot, I had to work a lot on this, on fear of loss. Specifically, we talked earlier about like when I was first starting out, you have, you know, $300 to buy wood for the year. If you're gonna make a cutting board, that's $50 to $70 of wood. And that's assuming you can get what you need. You know, if I do the math and I need 4 inches of walnut, but I go to the store and there's an 8-inch walnut board, I'm buying the 8-inch board. You can't cut it up, and then I'm cutting it, and then I have this other sitting there. So now I only have 4 inches. What do I do with this? And that's half my budget for the year, you know. And so that fear of losing would mean that everything had to be dead planned on. I planned out every inch of every piece of every wood that ever went through my shop. And I was creative, but that fear was such an obstacle to me to really just trying it, you know, and just try. And most of them are okay, and some of them are just a disaster, but you got to try. And now that I'm doing this full time, I have enough churn and cash flow, and I have an avenue to sell the mistakes. And I just mark it 30% off, 20% off. If I hate that one, here you go, free, answer the survey. Person at the end of the day gets one. Like, I don't care. You know, just get rid of it. And that lack of fear has been incredible for my process. Just do it. I mean, for me, I taught myself how to woodwork by watching YouTube videos and practicing. And actually, it's funny, the chair that you're sitting on right now, I built that chair. And that was one of the motivators to get me into woodworking. My wife said, I want garden beds, I want a bench, and I want a chair. And so she made okay, this is what I want. And I said, okay, and I built the outdoor stuff first, because the garden beds, those are the lowest tier because they can have a lot of mistakes, you know, and you work your way up. And it took 8 years before I built the chair, because chairs are actually one of the hardest things to build. It is an incredibly small object, so you have very relatively thin members. They are joined together in ways that are not that easy to cut, And then they have to have a lot of torquing stress on it. You're not just sitting on it. It's not just pressure, but you're going to lean on 2 legs, and there's going to be a lot of twisting motion on those really thin pieces that are joined together in hard to cut ways. Like, if you're not good at that stuff, if your mortise and tenon's too loose, like, the whole chair will collapse, So it's not an easy task. It's actually one of the harder things to make. And so I sat down, I said, okay, she wants chairs, and she hated this. I said, she wants chairs, okay. And what are the things that I need to do to make a chair? And I made a list, and it was like 28 things. And I said, okay. And I started at what's the easiest. And I started there, and I went on YouTube, and I just taught myself how to do those things. And each thing had a project. I have a background in science. And so in an experiment, you change this, you measure that, you keep everything else the same, and you learn something. And so I'm always changing, but I'm trying only to change 1 or 2 things so I can actually attribute it to a cause. And then I keep going, and I slowly learned how to do all of the things. And so then I built her a chair, and now we're in 5 years now, 6 years, we used it. It's great. We learned one design error because it broke in one way that I had the top piece stick out too far. So when it falls, the top piece is what hits first. And so it fell over sideways and the top piece popped off. But we just put it back on, shorten the top piece. Now it hits flat, and so it's fine. I do art shows. I do Saturday markets in my city of Salem. So I live in Salem, Oregon. So I do like the Saturday farmers market downtown, and that's a really easy baseline to get in. It's a repeatable group, so I get to see people every time, and that for me is a really useful tool for kind of like market research, because I'm there every week talking to people. I can see what they looked at, what they did, and then I do art shows and high-end art shows all across the Pacific Northwest. And I travel and I stay in my van. I have a minivan. So my rule for the show is I have to be able to pack all my stuff in the van, drive there and unload that first day, because usually you set up the day before, and then I have to be able to sleep in my van. So I do not want to leave my stuff in the back of a hotel, parking lot, whatever. So my limit is about 8 hours from where I live, because that's about as far as I can reach. And that first day, and then on the way home, usually I will stay in a hotel after the show, because you're usually packing up at like 7 p.m. I'm not driving 8 hours after that, So I just brought examples of the creative process. Okay. So this is a very popular board. And so we were looking at this. This board is incredibly popular just because it's chaos and it's fun. This is my top selling pattern, which is just a chevron. So they're just put together in a zigzag like this, and some cool funky wood parts of the wood get mirrored. And so you get some really cool mirroring. People call this online, they call it the kaleidoscope pattern. But this is brand new, right? And this pattern just came out. It's been at one show. These are an optical illusion pattern. And you can see here, you can see the pattern. So it's this row color pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the same. So every fourth, so it's A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, all the way across. This one is the same pieces, but DCBA. Interesting. And so you get the opposite. And say, so one I call it pull in, one calls push out. Okay, so then what if I do both? And it goes up and down. And so you can kind of see like a hill's forming, and now this one's a circle. And so this one's a circle, right? This is an optical pattern. Pretty famous. Everyone uses, I call this my lattice pattern. This piece here, you can see this one is made here, and the background is a white, but it's white and it's maple, which is the same white as the horizontals are. And that's interesting when compared with this pattern, same pattern, different batch, same pattern, but now the background is in ash, which is also a white color, but it has more texture and grain to it. And because it has more texture and grain, it gives it a much deeper feel, way more depth when there's that color. And so I started looking at, so for me, when I look at wood, wood isn't just a color, it's also a texture. So white, I call it maple, is kind of meh. White for maple is a white and it's meh. It just kind of all comes together into this big meh. And it's great when I want here 8 pieces of maple all come together and kind of meh together. They all kind of fit in, and they all do, and that's all fine. But if I want something to not fit in and fade away, I want something that's white but that's not maple, it's got to be, an ash, and I have a few others that I use, the same concept. And each batch I'm trying something different, and I've kind of settled. So you can see this is a earlier batch, and I can say I've gotten a lot better, right? This is like This actually came from the batch, the first time I had done this particular pattern. And this is the like 4th time I've done this particular pattern. This is the last of his batch. He's an orphan and he's lonely.